concluding at the Sandton Convention Centre. 6 countries have now been given the green light to join this bloc from January 2024. Rod Alence is Associate Professor for International Relations at Wits University. He joins us now for some analysis and reaction, perhaps. Rod, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us here on today. The BRICS Summit is about to wrap up. We're waiting for the closing remarks after 5 from the incumbent chairperson, our President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa. Were you surprised when you had the news about these 6 countries that will be added to the BRICS bloc? We're going to be having BRICS Plus come January.
Yeah, I have to say I was surprised. I thought with India's position coming into the summit, there wasn't much of a chance that the enlargement would actually happen during the period of the summit. So it was surprising to hear that news today.
Yeah, but is there any particular country that you were surprised in terms of it being included in this first phase, what President Ramaphosa called the first phase of the expansion?
I think all the names there had been mentioned. It looks like it's kind of a mix. I haven't seen the fine details of what the eligibility criteria that were applied were. But it seems like there was a fair amount of horse trading that went on as well, in that if you look at the list of the new members, you can kind of guess which of the original 5 would have been backing each of them. And it looks like they've made a few trade-offs in terms of different states wanting different new members to join.
Yeah, I mean, South Africa pretty much has relations with all of them, and judging by its non-aligned stance, what's the significance of this move to expand BRICS, and what are likely benefits for South Africa?
Well, I think the challenge for BRICS, going back, more than 10 years when it was founded, has been to make BRICS more than just the sum of its parts, because we hear the numbers about the population and the GDP that's accounted for by the members. And of course, now that we've got new members, that's going to increase, those numbers are going to increase. But the question is, can the whole be greater than the sum of the parts, both in terms of these geopolitical issues that the UN Secretary General was commenting on, as well as the more bread and butter issues of things like manufacturing exports from South Africa that can create jobs.
Yeah, the issue of global reform or reform of global institutions to enhance multilateralism or a multipolar world seems to have been very front and center of some of these leaders at this summit.
Yeah, I mean, I was struck the first night, the Brazilian president, Lula da Silva, was really emphasizing the role of the G20 going forward. And that's a body that would bring together the major Western powers of the G7, as well as a good number of the BRICS countries. And so I would think that would be a logical forum for talking about some of these big geopolitical issues of global reform.
Yeah, I mean, there's conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and that matter, I don't know what's your sense of how it was dealt with. President Vladimir Putin did address it, also in his opening address, and today in his closing remarks earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was probably an attempt not to among the BRICS members not to create a big to try to keep the focus a little bit away from that. I haven't seen in any of the resolutions anything that was really a particularly strong endorsement of some of the positions that President Putin put forward on Ukraine. But clearly there was an attempt to keep everyone on board within the organization.
Yeah, it wasn't really the main issue, but there was an acknowledgement by our own president that there's a need for dialogue, there's a need for negotiations to try and get to an end of the conflict. Do you think at all if it will be important for peace to exist between Russia and Ukraine before Russia ascends to the chairmanship of BRICS next year?
Well, it's certainly going to complicate matters, particularly in interactions beyond the BRICS group. If Russia is in the lead, it's always awkward in that kind of a situation. But we'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah, Prof, just an overriding question. Are we seeing an emergence here, I mean, of a new power bloc, for lack of a better word. I mean, we hear the countries like South Africa and Brazil saying they've got huge misgivings about the structure of the United Nations, the Security Council, the fact that Africa doesn't have a fair share, and so many other issues. But we also hear about people saying they want de-dollarization. They want to end the hegemony of the United States and a unipolar approach. Is this, Mark, with the expansion of the original BRICS bloc, is it the beginning of the emergence of a new world order?
Well, I think you need to really separate two different sets of issues. One is the kind of more geopolitical global reform issues. And I think in that area, you know, having a bigger group together to the extent that they can get consensus on some issues will be helpful. I think if you turn to the more bread and butter economic issues about trying to encourage trade and investment among these countries, the record hasn't been actually that great over the past 10 years. The patterns of trade and investment look quite similar to what they did beforehand. I mean, I've mentioned that the South Africa, despite the crisis in Zimbabwe, South Africa actually exports more manufacturers to Zimbabwe than it does to China. So that shows how slow going the kind of economic integration process is. And that could actually be more complicated by the fact that we have more members joining. But I think that the big push, I mean, de-dollarization is certainly not something that's going to happen over time. We're not 100% on the dollar. We're never going to be 0% on the dollar. It's something around 58% now. I think the Chinese yuan is about 3% of global foreign exchange reserves of central banks. So those things will take quite a while to come to fruition. Okay. But I think that the Western sanctions on Russia have really kind of put a bit of a fright in the BRICS countries about the vulnerability on things like payments systems. So I think there's some emphasis on at least having a plan B that will protect them against the full might of those kind of sanctions.
Thank you very much, Professor Rod Alence from Wits, just giving some of his insights about the BRICS Summit that's wrapping up this afternoon.